Hello and welcome to Third Thursday at Hoovers. I'm Brad Reiners, Communication Director at the Hoover Presidential Foundation. Thank you for joining us this evening. We have a very interesting program for you tonight with a presenter who knows an awful lot about the subject matter, Herbert and Lou Hoover and mining. But before we begin, I'd like to remind you of a few upcoming programs for you to share with your friends and family. There are only 3 days left to enjoy a fascinating exhibit at the Quarton Gallery. It's called 1968, A Folsom Redemption. It features details on performances Johnny Cash made at the prison from photos and stories by two journalists who were there. It also details Hoover's plans for prison reform. The exhibit closes at 5 p.m. this Sunday, so don't wait too long to come and see it. I'd like to encourage you to visit our website, hooverpresidentialfoundation.org, where you can learn about a major fundraising campaign for the renovation of the Hoover Presidential Library and Museum exhibit spaces. It's been 30 years since the last major renovation, and we're excited about bringing new technology and other updates into the museum. We have a special benefit for Iowa taxpayers who contribute to the Timeless Values campaign, where you can earn an Iowa state tax credit equal to 25% of your gift of any size, no matter how much that gift is. There are still funds available from the state, but they won't last forever, so I urge you to consider making a gift soon. Now, as for tonight's program, please enter any questions you have for our speaker in the Q&A link at the edge of your screen. You can even vote for someone else's question if it's of interest to you, as questions with more votes tend to get asked first. So as I mentioned before, tonight's presenter knows a great deal about Herbert and Lou Hoover and about their adventures in mining, because she is the director of the National Mining Hall of Fame in Colorado and was previously the education director, archivist here at the Hoover Presidential Library Museum. So with us tonight is Elizabeth Dinschel. Good evening, Elizabeth. I'm looking forward to your presentation tonight.
Good evening. Thank you for having me. I have never seen that video before. I am so excited for Iowa and for you guys. The exhibit in the museum is going to be just awesome. I'm so excited for you guys. So definitely donate to that, especially if you love Hoover, because that's a big deal.
Thank you.
That is a big deal. All right, I'm going to share my screen here. So tonight we're going to talk about Herbert and Lou Hoover, the geologists and miners in the White House. And in all my time in Hoover, this was something I learned a little bit about, that I've really learned a lot about since I left. And I want to share with you guys our museum too. I'm assuming most people won't make it up to Leadville, Colorado, but we do get about 30,000 visitors a year. We're housed in the 1899 schoolhouse that was the Leadville High School, plus the old junior high that was built in the 50s and the administrative building that was built in the 40s. We have about 25,000 square feet of exhibit space and a little over 70,000 square feet of building space, a lot of collections. We have full hard rock mine recreations to walk through. That's where these visitors are right now. It's one of the favorite parts of visiting for most people. We do have a recreation of Leadville's train and Leadville's Ice Palace that you just saw that was built by J.J. Brown, an amazing exhibit about gold. And this is the Matchless Mine. It was owned by Horace Tabor, and the museum owns the mine. It's open from about the end of May until the end of September annually, depending on snow that we get. The snow load here is about 180 inches per year, so we have to put in supports and close down. We have this awesome exhibit about mining in space and the feasibility of whether or not we can actually afford to mine in space. It's a really interesting topic. It sounds like we're going to wait for things to crash into the earth before we collect them. We do have a full gift shop and bookshop and a lot of other fun stuff. So if you come up to Colorado, come see us. We've had a lot of visitors from Iowa. It's really an awesome place. It is really cool. So I want to start at like the beginning of where Herbert Hoover and Lou Hoover really discovered geology and mining. And Herbert Hoover was in that inaugural class at Stanford University in 1891. He originally failed the admission test, which we talked about in the Hoover Library too. But he was really a good worker and he tried really hard. And we even see that later in his mining career. Some of the people that were in charge of hiring Hoover said, well, I saw his report card. It wasn't very impressive. And that's kind of embarrassing and sad, but turned out he was a really great miner. He was elected as class treasurer. They said he was a barbarian because he was really strict about where the money was going. But I think this is really where he demonstrated his first sense for business. And he really worked hard at that. And yeah, they said he had first class executive ability rather than intellectual achievement. And he studied under Dr. John Casper Branner. And we're going to talk about him next too. But he was a very well-known professor at Stanford. And he really focused on applied geology. And the geology department really shifted to geology and mining much later. But up until 1919, half of the students on the geology track at Stanford University were really studying geology and mining. A formal engineering track was not added until 1918. So Hoover didn't really have that opportunity to take an engineering track. He had to create it himself. And he gets some criticism for that later, but they're holding him to standards that didn't really exist in his time. But by all accounts, he took the right classes, including calculus, that would have tracked him to be an engineer. When Hoover finished college, it was this interesting transitionary period in mining. They did not trust people who were graduating from college. Instead, there was more value and emphasis placed on people who worked in the field, who had experience, who had the benefit of hindsight and trial and error and things like that. But Hoover left without this experience. So he had to go seek that out. Now, Lou Hoover, she attended a lecture by that same professor, Dr. John Brenner, in 1894. And that really inspired her to pursue geology. And before that, she was going to pursue education and already had a degree in education. So this was a major shift for her. Lou was definitely the first woman to graduate with a degree in geology from Stanford University, but we also think she might be the first woman in the entire United States to get a degree in geology. And had Lou been born at a different time, she would have been probably one of the most recognized geologists of the time. And one of the things we think that has happened is that some of Lou's geology work was actually ascribed to Herbert Hoover. We think he got to take credit for some of her work because it was the only way that it would get published and recognized. And I'll talk about that a little bit later too. But despite those barriers, Lou continued to pursue geology in different ways. So the other thing that comes out of them leaving Stanford University is the Hoover Institution. And the Hoover Institution to this day is world renowned in a lot of different areas, but especially economics. And recently, the Hoover Institution was remodeled and renamed, and they've gone through some transition. But from their website, it says the Hoover Towers Observation Deck and Carillon were named in memory of Lou Henry Hoover, Stanford University graduate, philanthropist, trailblazer for women, and the wife of America's 31st president, Herbert Hoover. Lou Hoover had talents in various other disciplines, including architectural design. That talent was fully on display when she built her family's residence on the Stanford campus in 1920. Today, the Lou Henry Hoover House is a National Historic Landmark and home of the Stanford University president. Lou was brilliant in a lot of different ways, languages, architecture, engineering, geology. We think there's a lot of things that maybe we don't really know all about Lou, but she is heavily in this story, and we'll kind of explore that a little bit. So Herbert Hoover really went through this period of becoming a miner that is different than the process now in a lot of ways. But in 1894, he was a field assistant for Waldemar Lindgren at the USGS. And that he will come up again in the future because he wanted to hire Herbert Hoover again. And in 1895, he really starts to seek out job training. Surveying was an important part of becoming an engineer, but it really made him aware that there's this difference between people who are educated in mining engineering and people who are actually mining engineers. And so he wanted to pursue that experience. He called them skilled artisans who were trained on the job. So he had a lot of respect for these people who had been working in the mines but had not gone to college before. So he goes out in 1895 to California. The gold boom is happening, and he starts at the lowest possible level. He pushes ore carts for 10 hours a day for $2 a day. And if you've never seen an ore cart or know how heavy they are, it's about 1 ton. This is exhausting work. And he worked really hard. And there's this great story that on his first day, he showed up to work in the mine with his lunch in a paper bag. And underground, there's rodents, and rats ate his lunch. And the mine manager actually had to give him part of his sandwich so he could eat that day. And to this day, you'll see miners with their metal lunch boxes if they're going underground, because things will eat their lunch. After several months, though, he became a driller's assistant, so he's moving up. But the big thing that happened was that Hoover trained with Cornish miners at the Reward Mine. And the Cornish miners are really revered as experts in hard rock mining. And even if you come to Leadville, we have this part of the east side of the city where there's these historic mine head frames. And there's one head frame that really stands out. It's above the tree line. It's different than the other ones. And it's a Cornish head frame. And it's really, really impressive to see in person. But it would have been the head frames that Hoover was exposed to during his time. So after a few months of working underground with the Cornishmen, in 1896, Hoover offered to work for renowned mining engineer Louis Janin for free. Janin turned him away. He's like, I'm not going to let you work here. I don't need you. And Hoover said, please, I'll work for free. And he said, okay, fine. So he sends Hoover to go work on these reports. And with those reports, he really impressed Janin. And Janin decided to make Hoover his full-time assistant. He became personally involved with the upper management of the different mines, and he learned many skills from the senior engineers. He would hang out in bars to have conversations with them after hours, like diligently taking notes so that he could learn more about the business and learn more about the industry. He was sent to 5 different mines in the Western United States to evaluate all of the operations and write reports on his findings. And this is significant because this is how Hoover builds his career. His ability to write reports and make very intuitive observations about operations and business were critical to his success. And he was doing it like nobody else was doing it out at that time and producing these reports that were extremely impressive. So by the end of 1896, Hoover is making $200 a month, and that's about 3 times the salary of an average miner for this time period. And word starts to get out. People encourage Hoover to publish. He starts publishing different articles, and he really becomes recognized. Well, Lindgren comes back from the USGS and begs him to come work full time. And Hoover talks to these people who had mentored him and his brother and his family, and they all encourage him to pursue a career in gold mining. And he decides that's the route he's going to take. So in 1897, Hoover sent to Australia with Bewick, Mooring and Company, and the abbreviation for that is BMC. And they hire him to be a field representative in their Western Australia mines. And this is what Hoover looked like when he goes there. And he was trying to look older. He's in his young 20s at this point in his life. And to the left is this really outstanding picture of one of the mines in Western Australia called the Sons of Gwalia. And we'll talk about it, but it's been converted into a museum. And you can see at the very, very edge, that is actually Hoover's manager house. And he had said he wanted to be where he could see people working. Obviously, this is an open pit mine, And a lot of what used to be there is gone because it was swallowed by the open pit. But they did preserve this area of it, and you can still go visit it to this day. So in Australia, this is where Hoover really got to kind of break his teeth on being a leader. He really made a name for himself as an engineer and a modernizer of mining operations. And it's interesting because he learned from the Cornish, but he said that American mining and American tools and American methodologies were better and more efficient and yielded better results. But he convinced BMC to develop this Sons of Gwalia gold mine near Lenora. And he served as the superintendent until late 1898. And he was really known for cutting costs and improving mine efficiency by driving his workers hard and hiring cheaper immigrant labor. His boss called him a slave driver, and he took pride in that name because he made those guys work so hard. He did not settle for mediocre work and things that were going on that he saw in the mines in Western United States. After a short time in Australia, Hoover relocated to China, where he continued to work in the mining industry. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. But during the early 1900s, he intermittently returned to Australia to do inspection visits for the company, for BMC. He was later involved in setting up mining companies in Australia, including the Zinc Corporation and Lakeview and Star Limited. And upon return from his visit to China, it was a visit, it was a short stay, he felt like the standards in Australia had really slipped in absence of his supervision. So he sent to America for, some people say like 12 or 13, he says 15 in his memoirs, but about 15 different miners from America, hired them as mine managers and really put them to work kind of overseeing the mine operations. By the end of the 19th century, Hoover is very aware that mining is changing and has changed, that technically and on the business side, things are never going to be the same in the industry, and that he was going to quickly adapt to meet up with that. And so some of the things that happened in the industry is there used to be really high grade, shallow deposits of ore. They were gone. They were gone in Leadville, they were gone in California, they were gone in Australia too. And this is the reason we have open pit mining. It was to get further and further down. But there's also a shift in the market. The market shifts away from precious metals and shifts more towards base metals, which are things that we need in day-to-day life. But he also knows that the milling of these ores has changed. We use different processes for it now, and that businesses were going to have to pick up, modernize, and adapt if they were going to keep producing enough ore to keep these mines open. So he advocated for really strong leadership in business management. And he wrote a textbook in 1909 called Principles of Mining. I have an awesome first edition copy of it. He wanted to see a mixture of miners with formal education and miners with practical experience. And he also wanted them to have a really strong sense of entrepreneurship. And he judged an engineer's worth not by how long they went to school or how long they had worked in the mines, but how good of a job they did. And he said this repeatedly, but his observations really led him to believe that the best workers were the mining engineers who had both of those things, education and practical experience. And he would go on for the rest of his life to advocate for education that did both. So I want to look at some of the Australian mines with you guys. These pictures are really remarkable because photography is not really advanced enough during this time to produce these kinds of photographs, you know, with any kind of consistency. But you can check out the miners here in one of the underground mines. And all of these photographs came from the Hoover Presidential Library and Museum archives. Thank you, Craig and Spencer and Matt, for working with me to get these. Our people that are here at the Mining Museum think they're awesome. Here's another one of the guys working, and these are one of those ore carts. Sometimes I forget people don't know what these are because we have so many of them, but they're on a rail, kind of like a train. And so they would get pushed out on the rail. So let's look at another picture. Here's another one of the ore carts here, and it looks like they're probably doing some welding, maybe on the ore cart. They are and were metal at the time. And the guys are up here on top of some of the mine supports working. And so there's this interesting thing that happens in underground mines. The earth is constantly shifting, and it's not something we really think about because it's happening underneath our feet and way below where we can feel. And in Leadville, it's one of the things we deal with because these shafts that have been buried collapse eventually and shift. And so in order to keep them standing upright, there's constant adjustment and reinforcement to the framing in these mines. Here's another one, and you can see some of that framing that I'm telling you guys about, but these guys working in the rails. This is one of the drills back over here, you can see. And now this one is, let's see, this is one of the mines in Australia. This is 1903. Sons of Gwalia is in here, and this is part of what might be gone. But you can get an idea of what the operations kind of look like up top. And then I want to show you guys this up here. I'll zoom back into it. We call that the head frame. And that's how they're moving things up and down from underground to the surface so that that ore can be milled and shipped off. And I really love this page because it shows handwriting about dropping a shaft and what they were doing here for that shaft in this mine. And a look at what, this is a big group of horses. In Australia, I should mention the journey out there to where they were mining was so remote. There was no roads. Horses couldn't traverse it. It was so hot. If you were here for the introduction, it was a desert. So they got out to the mines by camelback. And Hoover was not thrilled about that. But there was teams of horses and camels that moved a lot of this stuff around for a long time. This is also Sons of Gwalia. There's another head frame in the background there. And here too, and this is from 1903. And here's some more of the mine operations that come in these scrapbooks, another head frame that's gone up. And these are some of the other mines that are across Australia that they were responsible for. And this is interesting because this is when we start to get steam powered engines and even some other, there's hydraulics that come into play at this time too. So they're experimenting with different ways to mill, to pull things up from underground and things like that. And let's see, this is another one of those mines that are in operation here, another head frame and shaft here. Another one of the horse teams that's running on rail, which is wild to think about. So he said they took a break in China. And it's an interesting time period. Herb leaves Australia. He goes to California. Him and Lou get married and they go to China. And Hoover's, at this point, he's on the board of directors of the Chinese Engineering and Mining Company and was the chief engineer of the Chinese Bureau of Mines and general manager for the Chinese Engineering and Mining Corporation. One of the things that happens in mining is mine companies have to leave the country to get to minerals that are otherwise not available to them. And sometimes they find themselves in hostile regions of the world. And to this day, mine companies try to avoid mining in those areas because there's large risk to their investments. And that is exactly what happens when they get to China, because we're getting ready to see some strife in China. So Hoover's responsible for surveying the gold mines in Tianjin, Zihili, and Jihol. And his official job title was engineer-in-chief. He earned about 2,500 pounds per month and was given a large home to live in. Hoover was also supervising the development of the Kaiping coal mines, and at this time they're controlled by shareholders under his old boss's BMC, but specifically Mooring. He receives 10% of the profits on the Kaiping mines while he's working on making them more profitable for shareholders. And this is a picture of one of the mines that was in China. This is Lou Hoover. Boxer rebellion breaks out while the Hoovers are in China. And there's this big back and forth about contracts that are signed during the Boxer rebellion. Hoover was working with Mooring to get ownership of all of these mines that they had been working on for shareholders. And ultimately, the Chinese government refused to acknowledge any land transfers or purchases to foreigners that happened during the Boxer Rebellion. Herbert and Lou left China in July of 1900, but by November of 1900, Hoover secured a transfer of the mine and the financing from England that he needed. And this business deal, you could do a whole presentation on it, but it's very tumultuous and it's not universally accepted as a clean business deal. There's some accusations of exploiting the Chinese people and Chinese workers, but also the Kaiping mines were coal mines. And the British government came in and put the mines under British control and with the British military. So they were protecting these investments because the British banks and government had backed this mine financing. And the Chinese government was unstable. So they didn't really have the means to fight that. But it's a very interesting business deal that's probably not much different than business deals today, but people are very critical of it, and in some parts for very good reason. And I don't want to exclude that from the story because it's an important part of the history. Hoover returned to China in 1901, and in July of 1901, told his brother that they'd sealed the deal, and now he's a partner in BMC Company. This is cool. I actually found this today, and I didn't know this happened, but the Chinese government actually restored Hoover's office at the Kaiping mines. They're now called the Kaluan mines. I think I said that right, but they did a full restoration in 2014. And you can go there and see Hoover's old office. They restored it to his time when he was general manager of the mine. The mine is still in operation, and so is Sons of Gwalia. And that says a lot about Hoover's ability to pick mines that were going to have a long lifespan and had really rich deposits. The Chinese government said that on display there's porcelain from the Qing dynasty that was collected by the former US president, along with 150 original photos depicted by the history of the coal mine and other materials that are available to the public for viewing. The museum was built in 2008 and features more than 20,000 items which depict the significant history of the famous coal mine. And I love it. They've got pictures of Hoover up here, and some of these blue and white porcelain pieces are on display at the Hoover Library in West Branch, so you can still see some of them. And this is one of our favorite things to do in museums, putting the objects behind glass. This is one of those blue and white porcelains. There's Hoover's office. I love that it has a British flag on it. That's interesting. And some of those pictures of the Kaiping mine while it was operating during Hoover's time. And it's always awesome to see more Hoover on display. These were one of my favorite archival things at the Hoover Library. There's this series of walking maps. And one of the things we know about Lou Hoover was that she was really a skilled linguist. And she made these walking maps for miners to travel between, there we go, I think that's as close as I can get it, between China and Mongolia. And she provided these phonetic translations of really common phrases like, where is a boarding house? Where is a bathroom? What time is it? So that they could travel with a little bit of ease. She also marked spots that were not safe for people to travel through, which means she had some knowledge of the geography and the political climate between China and Mongolia. This also means she was working with the miners. To what extent? I don't know if we'll find out in my lifetime. Maybe we will. That would be awesome. But there was definitely some evidence that she was active in working with the miners and maybe at the mine while they were in China. So I showed you guys principles of mining. And one of the interesting things about principles of mining, it was a textbook and it's pretty slim, if you can see it here, but it didn't actually focus on how to mine in a lot of ways. Mostly it focused on the things that are up here that it talks about: valuation, organization, and administration. And these are things that are not covered when you're in the practical application of mining, right? It's not something you learn on the job. And it wasn't necessarily something that maybe you learned in college during Hoover's time either, but he was able to take those two things and through his own experience, really become the leading expert in the business of mining. And this textbook talks about that. But what he really focused on was dropping shafts faster, making them cheaper, and making them run more efficiently. And he talks a lot about that in this book. And I said something about it earlier, but those high-grade ore deposits used to be really shallow. Well, they became deeper. And he talks about how that impacts the valuation of the mines when you go out to look at them, if you decide they're worth purchasing or investing in, if you're a mine company. And it had not been done before. The textbook was used for a very long time and was eventually pulled again for some other controversial things that were said in it, some of which had to do with how to source cheap, unskilled immigrant labor. And at the time, that was what people did. And Hoover later in life kind of reflected upon that and said he did not really agree with that. And he did have some change of perspective later in life. So if you get your hands on the book, know that. And there's definitely some articles out there with him talking about that as well. So Day Ray Metallica is one of the most fascinating parts for geologists. And what's interesting about Day Ray Metallica for us in this presentation is Day Ray Metallica was being translated and the footnotes were being written at the same exact time that Principles of Mining was written. And there is almost no overlap in the content between these two books, which kind of puzzles people when they read it, but it becomes a little bit more clear when we understand that Lou Henry Hoover actually was behind the translations. They hired people later to work on them, but she was managing it. And we think most of Herbert Hoover's contributions to Day Ray Metallica came from the footnotes. So the man who originally wrote this, and I'll explain what this book is Georgios Agricola. And he began to publish studies of the region's mining knowledge, comparing local German practices to those of ancient Latin and Greek authorities, focusing especially on mineral medicines, because Agricola was an apothecary. And his interest in minerals really expanded beyond how they were being used for healing properties to the origins of how they were being mined and what techniques were being used to extract these minerals and how they could be identified because they needed more of these things. So how is it being done? And this book is written in 1555 and is published in 1556 in Latin. Over several decades, he works on these studies and he explores mines and caves and tries to figure this stuff out. And all of this research culminated into Day Ray Metallica. And he was he had already passed away by the time it was published. It was really like his life's work in a compilation. The Hoovers spent 5 years working on this translation and the annotations that go with it. And Lou Hoover, like I said, she supervised this whole team of assistants and secretaries and translators. And this is actually really cool. They had to recreate a bunch of Agricola's work in a lab because there was no English translation from the Latin to understand the metallurgical process that was used to identify these metals and minerals and how they could be used. So they, especially Lou, was doing a lot of this lab work to recreate Agricola's work from the 1500s so that she could explain it in English. And a lot of this revolved around assaying and mineral refining. And these technical insights, with the extensive research that was done, really made this translation a pivotal piece of work for mining engineering. And it is still used to this day and is kind of revered as one of the most fundamental texts in mining and metallurgy. And this contribution, this book, and it's kind of underplayed, I think, in a lot of ways, is really revered all across the world by people who work in the mining industry. And there's all these amazing reviews that come out at it. And it's funny, Herbert Hoover admitted that he wasn't very good with Latin and that German was the only course he ever failed, which is hilarious because these are the languages that the book is translated from. So we really think that he gave the book more of the scientific credibility in the mining engineering portions of the book, and that the science, laboratory science and the translation parts really came from Lou Hoover. And she at least received credit in the author line, and many of the research assistants that assisted her did not. And they were kind of afraid the only way the book would be published in the translation was if Herbert Hoover's name was in there as well. And you can see in the front cover of the book that his name appears first and then she appears second. And it's actually pretty impressive in 1912 that a woman was recognized for her scientific work. We have one of the books that Lou signed. It was on display on a Women in Mining exhibit, and now that museum, or that exhibit, is traveling to the Western Museum of Mining and Industry in Colorado Springs, and it will be on display there for a little while. I want to give a plug to the Colorado School of Mines, and this is really cool. This is a picture of Herbert Hoover with his grandson, Andy Hoover, and he really encouraged Andy to attend the School of Mines, and Andy did attend the School of Mines. Not only did he attend the School of Mines, but he worked in Leadville at the Climax and Henderson mines that were molybdenum, but he ended up specializing in coal mining later. And Andy came to the museum a couple of weeks ago and was showing me all of the tools that he used and all of the different things that he learned at School of Mines, and really just gushed about the education that he received there. And part of the reason that Herbert Hoover loved School of Mines so much was because it took those two things that he really valued, the business and the entrepreneurial part of mining, with the practical application and how you learn to actually be a miner and put them together. And to this day, there are mines that the School of Mines students work in. They take classes in business and entrepreneurship as well. So it was exactly what Hoover had advocated for in mining education. And during Hoover's time, School of Mines didn't exist. There was only Columbia in New York, and there was Stanford in California. And Stanford felt like it was superior because it was kind of in the heart of the gold rush. But we know now Colorado was a big part of that too, and Golden was a great place for the School of Mines. So Hoover was actually awarded an honorary degree from the Colorado School of Mines in 1935. And like I said, Andy graduated from there as well. And there they are, little Andy in his suit. It's so cute. So both Herbert Hoover and Lou Hoover are in the National Mining Hall of Fame. Herbert Hoover was our 11th inductee, and Lou Hoover was our 60th inductee. And one of our prized possessions at the museum is our copy of De Re Metallica, and it is signed by Herbert Hoover, and there it is, and we love it. So it is on display, and it's awesome to see Hoover from this perspective, because everybody that comes into the museum is excited to learn about mining. And the mining industry to this day, and the people who work in mining, really love and revere Herbert Hoover and appreciate all of his contributions to the industry. So they come in and they're anxious to learn about this side of Hoover that they didn't know happened. We talk a lot about him being the great humanitarian and a president and his post-presidential volunteerism and work. But all of that work was made possible by his work in the mining industry. And he really spearheaded and trailblazed a lot of different things in business that made mining more successful and more profitable, and turned it into the kind of mammoth industry that it is today. More than 40% of the world's GDP is dependent upon mining. It is a vital industry, and Hoover was an instrumental part of growing that to make our lives better. Mining exists all in our lives, and Hoover was aware of that, and he tried to make it a successful industry. So that's what I have. I'll take questions. My email is director@mininghalloffame.org. If for some reason you want to send me an email or have some more questions. I'm not great on the technical side of mining. Thankfully, Hoover was a businessman, because I have degrees in business and history. But if you have technical questions about mining, I do know the people who can answer them and can connect you to them. Thank you guys so much for coming. I'm so glad I got to talk about this today.
Well, it's great information, Elizabeth. Can you tell us, while people are getting their questions together and putting them in the Q&A link there for us, tell us how they can, where and how they can find your museum.
Sure. So we are in Leadville. We're about 2 hours from Denver, Colorado, and we're kind of nestled between Buena Vista's to our south, and Frisco, and Silverthorne and Breckenridge are to our north, and Aspen is to our northwest. So we're kind of like right in the middle of the mountains. Our museum gets about 30,000 visitors a year, which is crazy when you think about how isolated we are, but we are a great vacation destination. People love to come here. You can find our website, it's mininghalloffame.org, and you can buy tickets there, you can explore it. We're going to be rebuilding our website this year to make it more research friendly as well.
And it's open all year round. And in the summertime, the outdoor mine area
is open. Yeah, so we're open year round. In the, like I said, in the summer, from about Memorial Day weekend until Labor Day weekend, the historic Matchless Mine is open, and it's a National Historic Site. We have guided tours a couple of times a day, and then otherwise it's a self walk through. We're going to be doing some work out there this summer too. We're working on building boardwalks and making it ADA compliant, and things like that. It's a really interesting place because it's up on Friar Hill, which is historically where this amazing vein of silver was found in Leadville. It really kicked off the silver boom in Leadville. And we also had a gold boom in Leadville too. We had both. But Horace Tabor went on to become the governor of Colorado, and he has a really rich history in Colorado, and it's a very important historic place for the state, and quite frankly for the nation too. So come see us sometime if you're cruising through on vacation. In the winter, if you're skiing. I think the summer is better, but I don't ski, so.
Sure. So I have a couple of starter questions here too that kind of hit me during the presentation. You talked about Lou at Stanford and being the first woman in geology, and for viewers out there, her birthday's coming up in a couple weeks. March 29th is her birthday. So if you're here at the Hoover Library, we usually have Girl Scout cookies. But that aside, was there any animosity about women in science in that day and time? Watch the old movies, and it's always the stuffy old men with the long beards and curly mustaches and everything, and it's like, you can't have women in science. But
Yeah,
was
no,
there much of that?
that's absolutely the case. And that's why she was, the first. But even after getting that education, she wasn't afforded the same opportunities as Herbert Hoover, right? She ends up in California and is doing work kind of on the low. One of the things that we had in the Women in Mining display that Hoover has that we got from them is an award acceptance. She was given honorary degrees later, and she kind of joked very lightheartedly about it, that now she has something to put next to her son's trophies. But she was really aware of the fact that that opportunity was not going to be afforded to her. And so she was going to have to kind of blaze her own trail, so to speak. And even clear up past the 50s, women were having a hard time breaking into scientific fields. And now that's why we see so much effort to try to even get women into science, because historically it's just not a place that women have really occupied. It's not been a space they were in. So she was really ahead of her time and really tried hard to break through those barriers, at least for herself, so that she could have her work recognized.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned early on that Hoover wrote a lot of reports, and that helped him get a bigger start as early in his career. And I wonder, do any of those reports still exist at all?
I've seen some of them at Hoover, and some of them are still there. And those scrapbooks you were looking at, some of those were notes. I don't have any here at the Mining Museum, but I wonder where, the rest of them ended up. Some of them might still be in corporate records, to be honest, because the mines are still in operation. So.
Okay. Our first question on the list here comes from somebody you may be familiar with, Tom Schwartz. He's asking, Hoover's efforts at reducing costs through efficiencies in technology and labor explain part of his success, but didn't he also have a keen sense of how much ore a mine might produce over the course of its life, which also accounts for his success?
Yeah, and that's what I was talking about with the valuations, because he could really, he really perfected how you could look at a mine and see how long it was going to last, how deep the mine was going to have to go. And that's what I was saying about Sons of Gwalia and the coal mine in China is still existing, the Kaiping one, because that's not really common. Now when mines are built in the United States, they have to have an end of life plan. So there's environmental reclamation that goes into turning the mines back into what they were. And they eventually run out of stuff to mine. That's what he was talking about with the shallow deposits versus the deep deposits. But he really had a keen sense for developing an understanding of how deep those deposits went and how long they could be mined for. And the fact that they're open is a testament to the fact that he was right. And he was good at this in engineering, just in general, just semi off topic. He did the same thing with the Hoover Dam. He knew what he had to do to make it profitable and gave a date for when it would become profitable in the 80s. And they actually finished ahead of time, under budget, and became profitable before his projected date. And when does that ever happen in the government, especially through that lens? So he was really gifted at making good projections in business. And now we have whole accounting classes about projection and valuation and things like that. So he was very, very good at that. Very good at that.
Mm-hmm. Tom also asked, can you talk about Hoover's winning a gold medal for Day Ray Metallica and what that was about?
Well, they won a lot of awards for it. I feel like Tom should come on and talk about it. Because I think they have the gold medal on display at the Hoover Library, if I remember correctly, with the book. And it's kind of hidden, but yeah, they won honorary degrees, the gold medal for it, all kinds of accolades, and they're still winning stuff for that translation, and it's still being used by mining students and by metallurgists. So it's really a remarkable textbook that they did.
Mhm. Another question from a user is, they understand that the Hoover's wealth came from investments in mining, and they wonder, is that really correct? And what role did Lou have in deciding how what those investments would be?
Yeah, and when I talk about the Kaiping mine, Hoover got 10% of the profits that were coming from that mine. That was enormous amount of money at that time. And I don't know if we'll ever know Lou's role in that. But after that, he got the financing to purchase that mine with BMC, and then was getting more profits than that 10% that he was originally getting, just to turn it around. They called him the doctor of mines. So he would find these really distressed mines and then turn them around. I've heard a business guy recently say, I like to buy good businesses with bad balance sheets. And that's exactly what Hoover was doing. So he was turning them into investments. And that was something that people had not been doing before that. So yeah, that is how he made his money.
Yeah, I think what I heard was, early career working for the company, he would get a portion of the profits, and then as he built his wealth, he kind of stepped out on his own, doing his own mining adventures
Exactly.
and things.
Yeah, well, you're a manager for so long, right? And then you want to become an owner. So it's exactly what he did after he built up enough capital, and a lot of faith in his ability led to that financing and partners and investments. So it was really important.
Mhm.
Yeah, and Tom asked about the Stanford collection, and I talk about this all the time. While Lou was traveling the world, she was collecting geological specimens and sending them back to Stanford University. And the foundation of that geology collection is built personally by Lou Hoover and her careful curation of collecting minerals around the world and understanding what was significant and what was important. And then thinking about her doing all of the lab work for De Re Metallica and being able to understand how those things could be used and then sending them back. And I wonder too, because I wonder if she sent her notes about that laboratory work that they did with those specimens. But she really built not just like this breadth of knowledge about metallurgy, but helped to educate future generations of geologists at Stanford University. And that's why they're renaming things after her, which is super cool to see. And just to plug as well, and another awesome woman, Condoleezza Rice, is the director of the Hoover Institution now. So it's really got awesome women that are kind of frontiering the Hoover Institution as well in Lou's memory for her contributions, which is super cool. Yay, someone said that they were working at Climax in the 70s. Thank you. They've come to the museum and they've liked it. And thank you very much. We actually have a lady who works here, Brenda Miller. She worked at Climax in the 70s and helped blow open the open pit. She was one of the first women to work at Climax molybdenum.
And then Kim is asking, she said, you said that if Lou had been born at a different time, her career might have been different. What are some key moments in history of mining that opened the profession to women? Maybe after Lou had been through, or during that time, whenever.
Right. Well, and anecdotally, I was just talking about the women being hired in the mines. They were prohibited from working in the mines up until about the 60s. And they started hiring women miners to go work underground. And Brenda Miller will tell you it was very difficult. The guys made fun of them. They would like move things like that were going on. And it was really hard to retain women in the industry, but they were really motivated to be there and to change and shape the industry. So we're talking about a 50-year spread of time from when Lou was potentially in mines to the time that women were legally allowed to work in mining engineering. And now if you go to a place like Climax, there's women everywhere. One of my friends here is a rock haul driver. She drives one of the big Caterpillar haulers out at Climax Mine. And a lot of the people that we work with that are the business people and administrators are women, and environmental engineers and miners. So it's been changing. And we just had an exhibit about women in mining and how these women are really starting to trailblaze different parts of mining. But there was no end for them between really Lou, and we're talking the 70s is really when they start to get traction in the industry. And we're just now getting to a point, even in the Hall of Fame, where women have been in the industry long enough that we can recognize lifetime achievement, because there's a time period they have to work in the industry to be considered for this, lifetime award. And women don't have time in service yet to do that. We're just getting to that point where now we're able to induct women. But Lou was inducted as a historic figure. Mother Jones was inducted as a historic figure. We have very few women in the Hall of Fame. And that's just because it was so hard for women to be in that industry. And I think all the time about people like Lou, who could have been working alongside Herb in the mines and directing the mines and being a part of the investments and things like that, because she had the right mind for it. I assume they must have talked about it all the time. All the time. I own a business too, and my husband and I talk about it all the time. And I just can't imagine a life where they weren't sitting around talking about it constantly. So anyway.
Sure. Yeah. Gwen is asking, do you know how many people are employed in the mining industry? And I want to kind of expand on that a little. How does the number compare from the 1900s to the 2000s in that 100-year span?
Yeah.
You wonder, okay, so maybe there's more mining going on right now, but it's probably done in such a different way that do they need more people, or is it more machinery than people kind of? So I don't know. What do you think about that?
Well, a lot of it's automated, but I don't think there's really good records from the 1900s. And we see even our local history in Leadville, prospectors would show up on the train and start panning for gold, and now they're miners. But who kept records of that? We can look at how many people were kind of moving through and working in mining, but I don't think we have a really good number. But just for a really local comparison, we think the city of Leadville had 40,000 people at the height of the mining booms. And now our town has 2,700 people. And we have one of the biggest molybdenum deposits in the world here that's actively being mined. And it's shrunk over time, but that's as mining has become more efficient. But it also depends where in the world you're mining. The United States is heavily regulated. From the minute you step foot onto a mine site until the time you step off, everything is regulated, even how things are shipped overseas. But a lot of mining happens overseas that has different regulations, different processes, and they're definitely using more manual labor to mine in places like Africa and China and even Australia still. I don't have a specific answer for how many people work in the industry, but it's a good question. But we know how impactful the industry is to the global economy, which is huge. We have a saying here: everything begins with mining, everything. Your computer screens that you're probably looking at right now, or your cell phones, all have molybdenum from Climax Mine down the street, and you're just not aware of that. So it's a huge industry that really does make our lives better. Half the periodic table is in your cell phone, for whatever that's worth. Get a little nugget of wisdom today.
Lindell's doing some research on a book for John Casper Branner. And could you talk to him about how he could get in touch with you or even your cohorts at the Hoover Library so that he could get some help with some of that research?
Yeah, well, you can contact me here at the museum and I'll get it forwarded over to our curator, Jordan, director at mininghalloffame.org. And then definitely get in touch with the Presidential Library too. They have really extensive records about a lot of things. And since our focus isn't Hoover, we have much more limited focus stuff on Hoover. Like we have all of the books that he's written, and we have some stuff for Hall of Fame files and other things like that. But the Hoover Library is definitely going to be the place to go. So definitely get in touch with Craig or Spencer out there and see if they can help you. They got us a bunch of mining stuff too. And so Craig already has it ready. He can send it over to you.
Awesome. Helen's asking, is there evidence that Lou assisted in Herbert's valuations or helping him in his mining business endeavors?
Yeah, I alluded to, we don't have evidence of that. I mean, I wish we did, because that would be awesome for all of us, but we just don't. She was really, even if she was participating in the business, she would have been entirely excluded from record keeping. So, yeah.
Let's see here. The data used to determine the resource of a deposit are cores. Subsurface maps are generated from this data. Okay.
Yeah, we have lots of core samples. That's something we do have. So if you want to come see core samples, you can come to the mining museum and we'll show you awesome ones, because we have them from different levels. We have some from the Matchless Mine, which are some of my favorites, and they're on display. And we have some core samples from Climax and some other mines around the United States that show what those ore deposits look like as you get into the core samples. It's really, really cool. A representative from the heavy metal band Metallica asked about a copy of that, the Hoover book. That's fantastic. It's obviously still in print. If you're lucky, you can get an edition that's signed by one of the Hoovers at auction or when they come up for sale, and they do periodically. So if you really, really want one of those, you can kind of watch out to buy one. Hey, someone said they drilled some of the Climax samples at the 900 level. We have them. They're here. They're in our molybdenum exhibit. So yeah, the core samples are really, really cool. And if you guys don't know, molybdenum kind of has like the consistency of graphite after it's milled, and it's also used as a lubricant that's in your cars too. But it comes in these big bags. And I kept looking at the bags. I'm like, those look really familiar to me. Where have I seen those? They're the same bags they use to haul sand that they used in Cedar Rapids to stop up the river from flooding. And it took me a while to make the connection, but they're moving it the same way you move sand. The mill is really, really cool. It's really, really cool.
Well, we have time for one last question, and they're asking, was Lou the first female inductee into the National Mining Hall of Fame?
Yes, she was.
Awesome.
Yes, she was.
Okay, well, that is all the time we have for questions right now, but I do thank you, Elizabeth Dinschel.
I do want to say too, real quick, this person's right. All of the molybdenum that is mined and milled in Leadville is shipped to Iowa, and it's refined in Keokuk, Iowa. And so Climax Molybdenum does have a mill out in Iowa too. So Iowa is connected back to Leadville, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, a lot of local back and forth connection there. That's neat. I had never known that.
Yep, it sure is.
Great. Well, thank you for sharing your research and the story of the Hoovers and mining. As a reminder, this program is being recorded and will be placed on our website archive tomorrow for everyone to enjoy and share with their friends and family. Remember that the Presidential Library is open 7 days a week from 9 until 5, but the National Historic Site is under winter hours and they close daily at 4:30. So I also ask that you all join us next month when Hoover archivist Lynn Smith presents an audio-visual potpourri featuring some of her favorite photos and movies from the Hoover archives. Registration is now open for that webinar on our website or at your favorite public library's website. And also remember that to visit the Folsom Redemption exhibit, which closes this Sunday evening. This candid and personal photography exhibition covers a critical juncture in the career of Johnny Cash, one of the 20th century's most beloved performers. And the Hoover Presidential Foundation staff is ready to assist you with your membership needs or charitable gifts in support of the Hoover campus and museum renovation. You can learn more about that and even show your support at timelessvaluescampaign.org. There's still time for gifts to qualify for that 25% Hoover state tax credit. So on behalf of all of us here at the Hoover campus and the participating public libraries, we thank you for joining us, and we look forward to your next visit to the Hoover campus.